Hey everybody, this is Gary from Coast with Culture, and I am currently in Buenos Aires, about to fly to Bogota tonight to begin the journey back home after this incredible South America trip. And let me tell you, there were some great highlights along the way. I'm Gary, and this is Coasting with Culture. I like to combine theme park visits and riding roller coasters with various cultural experiences around the world. The end of the South America trip has come, and it's time to start heading back home. We'll take a look at some of the highlights from this excursion to South America, along with some fun facts about the whole trip. Plus, there will be some reflection on the lessons learned from what may have been one of the most challenging trips taken, and thoughts on what might have been done differently. The worst part of any trip is when you have to begin the trek back home. And this would be a longer trek, as I'd return to the first country of the trip before returning home to the Pacific Northwest by way of Vancouver, BC. The first stretch home would head back to Bogota in Colombia, where this whole South America journey began, which involved a lot of flying. And getting some really fun coasters, like Crater and Ipe at Parque del Café. There were also some great cultural experiences here, from Barranquilla's Museo del Carnaval to the River Cats of Cali, and the views of Monserrate in Bogota. The biggest challenge from Colombia was the attempt to complete a visit to two different cities with two flights in the same day, with only a short amount of time between them, made even more complicated by heading to an airport that was especially challenging to land in and commonly sees delayed and canceled flights. In hindsight, if I was aware of the difficulty of flying to Pasto, I would have allowed for more time to attempt the flight there, or investigated taking a bus instead. It also made me realize that when traveling to other countries, you should definitely see if smaller airports like this have circumstances that lead to common delays or cancellations. In spite of that though, I would love to make a return to Colombia. Should the opportunity arise, I'd make a point to stop to Medellin. The first flight to Bogota would be my last flight with Aerolíneas Argentinas. But before we took off, we had a bit of a delay due to a rainstorm, with winds strong enough to shake the entire plane. This certainly wasn't the first delay of the trip though, as some things led to complete changes of travel plans. I can see why people like this, because on a cooler day here in Quito, this would be a great way to warm up. Ooh. Definitely very creamy too. Muy delicious. You may recall that while I was in Ecuador, the second country visited on the trip, there were some major issues with my phone that I was using for documenting this journey, navigating, and helping with translations. This ultimately led to the need to make a side trip to Miami to replace my phone before flying back to Quito to continue the adventure. If anything, I definitely learned that it would be good to make sure that the tools you're using for travel are in working order before you go, so that if any issues are happening, you can resolve them beforehand. Even though there was this interruption in the middle of visiting Ecuador, there were still some excellent cultural experiences, from Quito's Old Town to the sight of iguanas roaming all over Parque Seminario. The coasters here may not have been quite as good as those offered in Colombia, but they were in places with other great experiences nearby to help make the side journey more worthwhile. Ecuador is certainly a country I'd hope to get back to, as I'd like to redo my visit to Quito when I'm not hampered with technical issues. And I'd love to add a stop to the Galapagos Islands next time. Maybe by then, Ray Park will have the old Monster Mouse running. The flight to return to Bogota was later in the evening, and thus I just grabbed a cab to get to my hotel upon landing, which is what I normally do with late arrivals. Unlike the beginning of my time in Peru, the third country of this trip, that portion kicked off with an overnight bus ride to Huancayo, exploring the city, and another overnight bus ride heading back to Lima to catch a flight to Trujillo. Peru was one of the best countries for cultural experiences on this trip, especially when taking the side journey over to Cusco. There were a lot of shameless coasters in Peru, including a ton of wacky worms. One of the biggest challenges from Peru came from getting to some of the parks located further away from the city center of Lima, especially since Uber was my main method of getting from point A to point B while in the area. I did mention this in the vlog from the second part of the Great Lima Coaster Hunt, and really, the only thing that would have helped would have been to know when the rides of the different parks were actually open. So in the future, if a park site doesn't specifically share that rides open at a different time than the park, it might be a good idea to try and contact them before visiting to try and plan ahead to save time. A return to Peru is very likely, as I truly enjoyed the country. If such a return visit happens, I'd go back to Cusco again, but this would be for the sake of heading to visit Machu Picchu, as it would be amazing to see this world-famous site. As I had just spent several weeks on the go for most of the time of this trip, this day in Bogota was more or less a chance to sit back, relax, and take it easy. One day just didn't seem like a whole lot of time, and that's how I felt about my time in the fourth country of this trip, Chile. Since the trip had to be kept within the range of my flights to and from Bogota, and I had so many places I wanted to see, Chile ended up getting the short end of the stick since all the coasters I was looking for were within a couple hours of the Santiago area, including those found at a park that was a huge surprise, Fantasylandia. Santiago also had some great places for views, including the highest observation deck of South America in Sky Costanera and Cerro San Cristobal. For obvious reasons, the biggest change I'd make on a return visit here would be more time for exploring. Chile is near the top of my list of countries I'd like to make a return visit to, especially for a chance to see the likes of Patagonia and the incredible Atacama Desert. Plus, Fantasylandia is going to be relocated to an area on the south side of Santiago, and as part of its move, they may be adding a new GCI wooden coaster, which would be a first for the South American continent, adding to the list of reasons to come back to Chile. After having a rest day in Bogota, the next was essentially a day of flights, as it would take 3 to make it back to the Pacific Northwest. With this being the last of my time in the South American continent, it seems like a good time to look back at the last country of the South America trip, Argentina. There were some rich cultural experiences here, from exploring the cities of Mendoza and Cordoba, to walking through Recoleta Cemetery in Buenos Aires. This would also be a good country for gaining coaster credits, from a number of shameless credits at FECs like Neverland, to the last larger park of the trip, Parque de la Costa. Surprisingly, Argentina provided the most challenges of the trip, from the need to rent a car for some of the more remote locations, protests that led to delays, and the currency problem that made getting cash more difficult. While the first two were relatively minor issues that could be managed easily, the currency issue was the one that was a bit more tricky, as it's kind of important to have access to money so you can pay for meals and transportation if they don't accept credit card. The biggest takeaway from this experience? It's a good idea to find out more about the current events of the places you're visiting, so you can be aware of the challenges you might face along the way. Had I known that getting cash would be tough, I might have made arrangements to get some Argentine pesos before I flew from Chile, or perhaps even gotten some back home in the United States. I also would have done a better job of remembering to set my alarm and making sure that I had the right location for the ferry that I was planning to take for a day in Montevideo, but that's another matter. While I had more issues occur in Argentina, I would still love to come back here and be better prepared for it. On a return visit, I'd love to see their portion of Patagonia, along with Iguazu Falls, along the border with Brazil. I'd also make a point to spend even more time exploring the beautiful city of Buenos Aires. After getting to see all these incredible places, it was time to head back to the Pacific Northwest on my 3-flight journey with United Airlines. Unfortunately, as I'd become too accustomed with this airline, it wouldn't be a very comfortable flight as it was pretty tight, especially as there was a larger gentleman seated next to me, and made it that I was essentially in contact with him and the wall of the plane for the whole 4-hour flight to Houston. From Houston, it was on to Denver, which, like the first flight, wasn't really too comfortable, but luckily it was only half as long. Landing in Denver was a bit trickier as there was heavy snow and low visibility. The captain aborted landing because another plane had not cleared the runway, but luckily we made a safe landing on the second go-round. After a short layover, there was one more flight to Vancouver. Last flight! The plane had some snow on it, so before we departed, we were sent to get the de-icing treatment. With that taken care of, it was time to head up to Vancouver. Upon landing in Vancouver, there were no more flights to complete on this trip, and there had been many. In total, there were 28 flights between 18 different airports on 8 different airlines, covering over 24,000 miles. And that doesn't even include the 2 attempts to fly to Pasto. While that flight didn't pan out, it, along with other flights during this trip, offered some incredible views along the way. And now that all the flying of this trip was done for, I was ready to head to the hotel before I'd make my way back to the Seattle area in the morning. But I might have grabbed a treat before heading there. Finally, the day had come for me to get back home, starting first with a few trains to get over to Central Pacific Station, where I'd catch the bus back to Seattle. During the ride back home, the border crossing that would normally be a quicker affair had a bit of a delay due to a certain pandemic. If you've been following along with the South America trip series, you'll notice the dates of the trip were around the time that the first known cases of COVID-19 were being found in the United States. In fact, the first known cases happened pretty close to where I live in Washington State. Stanford Bridge, a viewer of the channel, had mentioned in a few comments on these videos about how he was curious to find out how COVID affected the trip. Well, to be honest, it really didn't affect anything until the very end. Within the first couple of days of my arrival to Colombia, a friend of mine sent me a message online mentioning how I lucked out missing the virus because of when I left. I really didn't see much else with the virus in South America until I flew into Chile. Immigration agents began to wear masks, and there was signage requiring arriving passengers to disclose if they had been to the Wuhan province in the past 2 weeks before arriving to the country. This was also the case when I landed in Argentina. As my flights home came closer, I started to receive multiple emails a day from United about what to do if you'd been to China recently. I started getting so many of these emails from them, I sort of started to wonder if I'd actually been to China the whole time and just didn't realize it. In all seriousness though, I really didn't experience much of a difference in this trip until arriving back to the US border, as there were 2 passengers on our bus who had been to Shanghai. Some Irish tourists on board began joking that we might get quarantined, but fortunately the 2 passengers had not exhibited any symptoms and were allowed back onto the bus so we could continue home. It was the following trip to Florida for my friends Jay and Chelsea's wedding where things became noticeably different because of COVID. But as I sat on that bus for the ride back to Seattle from Vancouver, I had no idea what was about to come. Rather, I was still thinking about all the different coasters and amusement parks in South America that were part of this incredible trip. In all, I managed to gain 57 new coaster credits at 39 different venues. The vast majority of the coasters from this trip were clones of those that can be found at a number of parks around the world, but a few very unique coasters were enjoyed, such as Montaña Rusa, which used to operate at Worlds of Fun, and the obscure Wild Mouse coaster chased by stray dogs. There were some coasters missed along the way that I hope to get in a return visit, and I'll be keeping a lookout for any that might get added between now and then. Before long, the bus made its way back to downtown Seattle, officially concluding this South America journey. If you'd like to see any of the vlogs from this South America series, I've included links to each of the videos in the description below. Thank you so much for joining on this look back at an incredible adventure through the South American continent. I hope you've enjoyed it and that you'll come back to see more here on Coasting with Culture. Thank you for watching this Coasting with Culture video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and click the subscribe button below to see future videos here on YouTube like these ones, which you may enjoy as well. Additional content can be found at coastingwithculture.com, and you can also follow Coasting with Culture on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for announcements, previews, and updates. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, take care and safe travels.